Kate Mila Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's time for our Saturday book. This will be video number 1 of The Search for Hidden Sacred Knowledge by Dolores Cannon. Now, as I explained in my video the other day, the one with Iran and Pakistan, I chose this book to do right now, more because of time constraints. It was the right length. It should take us 2 weekends to get through it so I don't overwhelm everybody. And it's been a while since I read this book and took notes on it. So if I sound like it's all new to me, you know, it practically is. Anything that happened before yesterday is very unlikely to be in my memory bank anymore. So you'll forgive me, I know you will. So let's just briefly revisit Dolores Cannon. Anyone who is a follower of her work, and we've covered a number of her books. She was a hypnotherapist in the 70s who started out dealing with people's bad habits, nail biting, cigarette smoking, anxieties, insomnia, weight loss, and through a series of events that are described in her earlier books, she realized that she had the capability to bring people into a hypnotic state that allowed them to access their subconscious and look at their past lives. And it became a really interesting search for information about the past and an understanding of our present reality and where we're going. I recommend going back and looking at her books. This is her last book. Now, it's not the last book of hers that we're going to cover. It's being covered now because of its length, as I said. She has several other books. We've covered almost all of them, but this is the last one she wrote, 2014, before she died. And she died shortly after finishing the rough draft, and her daughter completed the process. In her work here in this book, Dolores mentions that she'd noticed over a couple of years towards the end that more people are aware of her work from the internet, and that she'd had a very long career doing past life regressions way before people discovered her on the internet, with her own developed hypnotherapy technique, which people learn how to do now. It's described by the letters, of the technique itself. People abbreviate it to the first letters, and I can never remember what they are. You'll forgive me. Anyway, she began teaching the method in 2002, and she taught over 4,000 people. It's used in therapy for healing phobias and bad habits and stress, insomnia. Many of those issues they discovered in this technique came from past life stuff that people brought to today. So she found a way to call in, the greatest power in the universe, which we all hold within ourselves, and she called it the subconscious. Not in the conventional psychology use. And then I wrote a little note for myself because the word subconscious was said so many times that I abbreviated it. So if I accidentally say SC, I'm reading from the page and it means subconscious. So she brought people down to the deepest somnambulistic level of sleepwalking, basically, that same level. And she was able to converse directly with the subconscious, and all of this stuff came from her clients. This is all from sessions that she recorded. She recorded on 2 separate recording machines. She had eyewitnesses and she took notes because she wanted her work to be preserved safely, so that these things were stored in separate places, but she also wanted them to be accurate and there to be no doubt that this is what happened. She said that she never considered herself anything other than a reporter, a gatherer of information, a researcher. And she observed that the information that she got built on past information. As she received it in small doses, digested it, processed it. She'd get a little more. So a lot of these stories have a sense of familiarity. They do repeat, but they repeat in greater detail every time. And so she will refer to sessions that she held in 1980, 1995, 2003, and there'll be increasing sophistication in discussing the same topic. And one of the other things she noticed, and I probably have it in my notes, but I don't remember, one of the other things she noticed was that over time and across distances, clients would tell her the same things, which was people who never met each other pre-internet, pre-publication, because she kept a lot of these sessions until she had a thread through the years. So these people didn't say in 1995 what they read about 1980. It was all published. Those particular issues were published at the same time. So she said that the secret mystery schools have been around forever, that there's much sacred knowledge that's been lost to us. A lot of it was handed down in the oral tradition, and, you know, time, death, disaster, information was lost. The sacred mystery schools began when one keeper of knowledge would teach it to a new keeper of knowledge who took it forward into the future through the years and passed it on and likewise. And this knowledge was kept only for a select few who could understand. So the concept is not just to hoard information. Protect it, yes, because there were those who feared it, didn't understand it, and went after it. But also, you know, the parable in the Bible about sowing your seed on rock won't grow. And you sow your seed on sand, it won't grow. But you sow your seed on fertile soil, and the soil has to be fertile. We have to be ready to hear this information. Personal story, I heard about Dolores Cannon at least 20 years ago. And she popped up in my radar over and over and over, and I just wasn't ready to hear it. I just would say to myself, oh, that might be interesting later. And eventually, I guess the time was right. And I've learned a lot from them. And I think Denise Siegel pointed this out to me, and I wasn't overtly aware of it, but it makes sense, and I think it's a really important, useful thing to keep in mind. She's from Arkansas and a very devout Christian. And it's important to understand that the context from which all of her work is done is from that tradition. It informs all of her work. Now, she's not preachy. She's not proselytizing. She's not on a pulpit in any way. I mean, that's laughable to think of that. But she does have a little bit of a tendency to kind of edge towards that Christian sensibility. Not judging. I'm just saying it's important to know that, because then you have the information you need to make your own decisions. So these sacred mystery schools have always passed information around down the times, and people didn't know about them much. They were occulted. And occult is not a bad word. Occult comes from the Latin, which means to keep hidden, to hide. So this is awful, but this is a perfect example. I often wondered, and then I found out about the Latin. In medicine, when there's blood where it shouldn't be, but there's not a lot of it, it's microscopic, and you can only do a laboratory test to find it, that's called occult blood. And it's just blood that's hidden. You can't see it. And there's a purpose. Put the medicine away now. It's just my frame of reference. There was a purpose for knowledge to be occulted. Either it was threatened and it was to protect it, or people weren't ready to hear it, or people would hear it and use it for their own benefit and to the detriment of the rest of the world. So only a select few could understand, and they needed to isolate the information because the knowledge made them targets. And an example would be the Essenes, which is now we know a legitimate community that did exist the Qumran, I'm so bad, Qumran caves, the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was kind of a hippie community, a philosophical community of people who lived with the equality of men and women, and belief in reincarnation, a lot of mystical beliefs that, you know, your everyday Jewish traditional person or Roman pagan person just could not digest. And when things threaten people, what do? They lash out. So this needed to be isolated and protected, and people in power would feel threatened and go after them. And then here I have it in my notes, so I guess I remember more than I thought I did. The Gnostics, the Essenes, they were completely decimated, gotten rid of. The only reason we know for sure they were a real thing is their writings were hidden in caves in amphorae. Witch trials is another example. Spanish Inquisition, I'm sure that's familiar to everybody. So most of this knowledge really is readily available today on the internet. For example, sacred geometry. There was a very long period of time where people were just completely oblivious. But people are starting to understand now. True understanding of all of this stuff is not necessarily everybody's path. That doesn't make you less than or better than. That is an indication of your journey. And we're all taking the same journey. We're just going at different rates and slightly different paths. And so it's a big mistake to feel superior. If you've heard the words sacred geometry, oh, no, aren't we all brilliant? No, it doesn't work that way. You hear it and you digest it, you understand it when you're ready for it, and everybody else at some point in their experience will be ready for it. So to some of us, because of the internet, this is all new, but it's old information. So this book collates many sessions over the years. I would give you an example of sacred geometry that unless you were into math and philosophy, you might not understand this. And I'm saying this in retrospect. I know this because I read about it. I didn't automatically know this. Crop circles. The more sophisticated, more recent crop circles have a lot of sacred geometry worked into them. The pyramids have a lot of sacred geometry worked into them. Just two examples. So chapter 1, Isis and the Machine People. So in past books, she has described discussions with ETs and their involvement, a long-term involvement in the development of life on Earth. Paul Willis's book, Escaping from Eden. That the message that Dolores Cannon has received over the years, many places, many time periods. She got the information over different decades. That our DNA was manipulated from more primitive primates on the planet by a more evolved set of entities. And they took responsibility for educating these hybrids that they manipulated. And they educated them. And ETs controlled their own lifespan, so, they were very powerful. And these hybridized creatures regarded them as gods. And we got legends, we got religions, we got myths, we got lore. But there was a kernel of truth at the beginning. They intervened to create humans that would eventually maybe be able to inherit ET abilities and to help humanity after the ETs left. So when they left behind these emissaries in their place. And they were sort of initiates, and they were the beginnings of the mystery schools. They knew what was up. That's where that started. They secluded themselves. They held themselves apart from ordinary, worker people. They were isolated from the general population, and they became the priests or the nobility, and they chose the next set of new initiates. And there have been wars and injustices to gain this knowledge. What was that book that was so popular? Dan Brown, you know, about the Merovingian dynasty, you know, the descendants of Mary Magdalene and Mary in Scotland, and I vaguely remember the book, but that's an example. That book was based on kernels of truth. You know, there's a lot of kind of modern Western mythology woven into it, but there's some truth to it too. And it's just an interesting story built around what Dolores Cannon is saying, sacred knowledge that has been hidden, sometimes hidden in plain sight. But now it's mostly available. You want to learn about the Masons, you know, go online. You can learn about the Masons. You no longer have to tap into their meeting hall and go through the rituals to find things out. And she said there's a reason for that. It's because the veil is thinning. It's not just because of technology. Technology is an instrument of the fact that the veil is thinning, and the people are reawakening to a lot of this knowledge. Our vibratory frequency is rising, and so we can understand it better. So the following regressions that she talks about in this book go back to a time before all of this was common knowledge, before the internet. We're going to talk about Babylonian temples, and, you know, yes, we understand that was before the internet. We're switching gears a little bit. The earliest Babylonian temples were open to the sky. They were observatories. And the priests' records that they found studied the skies for centuries and centuries and centuries. So what was this obsession, you know, with astronomy and astrology? This was the birth of astronomy and astrology. And it's speculated and kind of reaffirmed in her books that much of this was originally from travelers from the sky, that the ETs evoked this interest in their creations. They revered them and they studied them. But you needed telescopes. But at Qumran, actually I got that right, Qumran, which was where the Essenes were, where the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, the Gnostic Gospels were found, they found reference to things like far-seeing devices. So it was important to the ETs to keep up with things at home for travel and communication. And they needed to communicate with their origin. And this was also true at places like Stonehenge and Newgrange in Ireland. You've heard me talk about that. That was a phenomenal experience, completely unexpected. I knew nothing about Newgrange when my cousin dragged me there. Absolutely paradigm shifting experience. So at these different monolithic sites, people actually were studying the passage of the seasons, the position of important celestial bodies, and by the time of Atlantis, which was kind of a long time ago, they were highly advanced, and this knowledge that was almost lost by what happened to Atlantis actually got carried by survivors to Egypt. And it's obvious that the knowledge of the ETs was needed for the original constructions that went on in Egypt, because it was so early in human development, and human people were still just learning. There had to be some source of the knowledge that was put into play. So every civilization has some legend or other of culture bringers who taught skills to the rather pathetic primate inhabitants of Earth. And they almost universally have, pardon the pun, almost global mythology. These culture bringers came from the sky or from the sea, which is really interesting because even today UFOs are claimed to come out of the oceans. I think that's really interesting. The legends of ETs exist to harness the energy of the sun, harness the energy of the moon and the stars, and we're talking my favorite go-to, plasma physics. They needed to keep track of the time and the seasons, and they needed that for survival, for planting and harvesting. And this was a learned knowledge. This wasn't inherent. Some highly advanced civilizations, it's claimed, could use their mind to levitate stone, and that some of these really incredible buildings like Gölbekli Tepe in Turkey were actually used levitation to get these tons and tons and tons of stone moved. They have no idea how they could move them. So we're going to go into a session here that Dolores had with a person called Terry, who had come in for personal problems. And in a trance, this Terry, and I don't remember if it's a man or a woman, Terry sees herself as an acolyte of Isis, the goddess Isis, in a boat docking near a temple. Now, Isis was an ancient Egyptian god. She had a son, Horus, and Horus was the pharaoh. And this was probably the beginning of inbreeding with ETs and humans. They had magical powers, magical abilities. They associated with the star Sirius. And Isis is the goddess of rebirth, reincarnation, and the protector of the dead. Funny story, one of my daughters was going to name her baby Isis until by the time she was pregnant, you know, the Middle East and had happened and she thought better of it, but still upset about that even today. So Isis was worshipped by all Egyptians and other cultures too, and she was a lover of wisdom and healing. She ruled over dreams and dream interpretation, and she controlled the weather. She was quite busy. Kind of the Kamala Harris of ancient times. She did everything. So her cult, the cult of Isis, continued until the Justinian age, put an end to pagan practices with the Theodosian decree. Many ISIS cult leaders, their ideas were absorbed into Christianity. So this session with Terry is coming into a time, Terry is emerging into a time when the real ISIS, you know, from there, it was still alive. And Terry describes many students studying with her from all over the skies. Some are angry because they don't want to be there. They don't like being under a woman because she wasn't necessarily respected. Women weren't necessarily respected back home, wherever that was. But these students are required to stay a certain amount of time. Their place of origin is dark with lots of machinery. They wear masks and spiked head coverings. Oh, I'm sorry, hand coverings. They hide their faces because they're basically machinery. The masks look like eyes, look like a beak with eyes, and the eyes look dead. They're very quick and bird-like in their motions. Their voice is mechanical. Their flesh looks like feathers. They're like machine over them, sort of shaped like mechanical feathers. They're alive, but they don't have organs. They have intelligence. They're like an advanced robot. There's a lot of reports from Dolores Cannon's work eventually about experiences with half organic, half robotic, and fully mechanical with souls. And things that just are really foreign to think about, but we're putting it out there because she wrote about it. Isis says that she befriended them, that there's a need to befriend them to maintain the peace. And they're learning to have feelings and to have kindness, that these mechanical characters come from the Milky Way. Then there are other students who are 7 feet tall. They're bald in white robes, and they communicate through telepathy. They're here to study PowerPoints of the planet for use in Earth travel. I guess like electromagnetic points, ley lines, something like that, as navigational tools. Sometimes they use a craft and sometimes they don't. And what our books explain is that entities that are advanced enough to be doing this sort of stuff are in a higher plane, vibration, a higher level. And I would recommend go back and listen to the videos I made about the Hermetic philosophy, because it really explains in detail that each vibratory level, we're like 3-dimensional here, right? That each level is actually multi-level. It consists of planes, one on top of the other, just a visual. They're not literally one on top of the other, but that as you progress to the next level, your vibration increases, which is how you progress. And at some point, you are such a high vibration that it's difficult to bring yourself down back to the heavy, gravity-affected, lower vibration environment of Earth reality. And to make that journey simple, they will often manifest in, spacecraft. They could do it otherwise, but they want to be able to interact with us in a way that we can see them and hear them. And so they manifest in a material sense, and that's how it's done. And if you notice ancient stories of contact with ETs, I've always found this interesting, and I think this explains this question that I had. If you look at descriptions of flying saucers from the 1950s, they're very 1950s science fiction movie style. They have the engineering and design of the time period. And now, when we describe ETs and UFOs, they have a much more modern, high-tech, 21st century or farther appearance in design. And that's intentional. That's not us anthropomorphizing them, making them part of us. That's them making themselves relatable to us, which I think is really interesting. So, sometimes they use craft. The machine creatures have to use a craft that is kind of like a narrow tube to get from one place to another. The tall ones just are so powerful, they just appear. Humans and different ETs study side by side with ICs. They can't go with the dark ones, the machinery types, to their planet because they wouldn't be allowed to leave. A boat of people are pilgrims, and they come from the north to see Ices, and the description Cannon says is they look very much like Vikings. Now, Vikings were Scandinavian pirates. A Viking is a job description, not a nationality, not a culture. It was a way of making money. It was to be a Viking, to be a pirate. But they were Norsemen. They came from what we now call Scandinavia, for the most part. But there's a veil that protects her temple from all but the right ones. You have to be ready to deal with it to even be able to see it. The boat of the Northerners has come for knowledge, but they aren't allowed to see Ices. They're not allowed to do that because they see the temple only as a ruin, because they want power. They would misuse any knowledge that they got. And the area where she is looks different to different people. The more ready you are, the more you see, the more is revealed. The scales are lifted from your eyes. So Terry will take this knowledge back to teach to children. So suddenly, her perception in this session moves to a different life. A life today, like modern times. The death of a soldier in a war. Now, modern times meaning not pre-Atlantis. So the question Cannon is trying to figure out, is this like a Greek soldier, a Roman soldier? Which war is this? What's going on? So Terry, as this past life, is hit on the head from behind and can't really see who it is that hits him or her. So the spirit just walks away from the body and doesn't look back. Terry knows that he doesn't want to be a warrior again and doesn't know what to be next. You know, there's a heavy decision to be made. So is in the library with teachers in the spirit world and told Terry's a woman, told she must return to the earth to teach at the end times to bring the presence of her golden light. Referring to like now. So Isis was originally from God, and so Isis is a very powerful entity that comes directly from the source and to bring knowledge, but she's extremely upset by how we treat the earth. She comes and goes across a crystal bridge, and we were talking earlier today and remarking that plasma physicists believe that all the knowledge of all the lives lived is encoded mathematically in our DNA, in each DNA. All the information we would ever need about everything is encoded in the crystalline structure deep in our DNA. This is cutting edge science. They're able to show this. Don't ask me how. I still don't get vectors. So, anyway, she comes across this crystal bridge. I think that's a significant feature of this story, the crystal part. She left after too many of these machines came. They can't be taught, but they wanted to take the earth. Terry was taken, and she couldn't survive on their planet and died. So the end times that she was told about is just the end of one way of thinking. It's not the apocalypse. It's not the book of Revelation. So don't confuse that. It's a paradigm shift from one way of being and thinking to another. Isis will bring harmony, peace, understanding, and will show the light. So the machines are still around, but they've changed to look like people. They've morphed, and their thinking is wrong. Now, I bet you can come up with a few names of famous people in positions of power who feel dead inside. I'm just saying. So their planet blew up and they're stuck here, and we're stuck with them. Because they're machines, they don't die. They move from body to body, whatever that entity is internally. They inhabit bodies that don't have souls. I could name a few soulless characters. The soul in the body wants to leave, and an agreement is made, kind of like a walk-in. The body had a soul, but moves out for this machine to move in. It's like a walk-in. And in an ordinary walk-in, the soul's knowledge, they know each other from previous lives. In this, it's not true. With these machine souls, they don't know each other. The agreement is made between a higher power and the original soul to allow this to happen. So this is not a big freak out about possession and stuff. This is all arranged and agreed upon. Always done with permission, because the primary law of the universe is you don't interfere with free will. So when Isis returns at the end, at the last, of this paradigm shift, these characters will disintegrate. They will leave. They can't hang around. They're mean. They have power. They hide in bodies. Their eyes look dead. Okay. I think they've neglected to mention they congregate in Washington, D.C. So Terry describes what person she will be during the end times. She's going to look like a 5-foot-tall blonde. This does not describe the Terry who's in a hypnotic state. So, okay. Doesn't describe her. She said she'll be a well-known figure, that people with knowledge will all come together, that scrolls are hidden in a gold box. They were hidden by those who stole them and don't want people to know the truth, and that those in power had lied, but they will be rediscovered. Terry and the others will bring them to the light around 2050. I am going to be very long in the tooth. It makes me mad. Anyway, the world will be peaceful. The machine creatures will be gone. There won't be war, and people will be learning. They will have finally woken up. Sorry, Ron DeSantis. Terry needed to know that she had another lifetime coming. This was an important reason for her to actually go to this session. She wasn't aware of that it was important, but Dolores Cannon is saying, you know, she was sort of led to this session because she needed to know that. So now we're going to talk about another client, a different session. She was told in her trance that she needs to work with feminine energy and implant feminine energy in human consciousness. Important to remember, not gendered. This is about creative, active energies, the yin and the yang. So she fears what she sees, this other client, that the earth splits in half, and fears that she was responsible for it. But she's told that this is a metaphor for the splitting of consciousness, and that humans need divine feminine to come into balance. So this woman fears that she has latent powers to split the earth, and it's caused her subconsciously some issues. Chapter 2, they think we are gods. In the earliest times, the ETs stayed as long as they wanted. They left and they died only when they felt like they were ready to. People knew the ETs were special because of this. They intentionally interbred with humans to create elevated leaders to help after the ETs were gone. So that's where the pharaohs came from. They're actually bloodline thing. That notion of like noble bloodline was actually rooted in a tiny kernel of truth. And they were worshipped as gods. So next session is a woman named Rachel. She's a writer who believed that she had something to do, but was being held back by fear and really wanted to investigate that. So in her trance, she finds herself in a palace overlooking beautiful water with a cove and a beach. She's on a balcony overlooking the water in a bedroom, and it's a beautiful day. And mostly servants around her, she notices, in this palace. She's dressed in draped cloth and gold, and she seems very wealthy. It's kind of an idyllic situation. She knows that this bedroom is her sanctuary. She has many royal duties and functions, and it's very boring for her. Banquets, speeches, protocol. She has to make nice with people for hours. This is done in the palace, or she's carried to a nearby temple. On the water? Oh, on a litter. She's part of a royal family. She says they think that we're gods, but we're not. It's the alien blood in us. She confirms that in earlier times the ETs mated with ancestors of ours to leave leaders who were superior with abilities and technology above the ordinary human. We are hybrids. They weren't good rulers. They used humans as slaves. They used them not much better than we use animals, which is not good. They used humans to mine resources and to care for the ETs. Their offspring were chosen to be the next rulers. And they had to leave. They had a war at home with each other. And they had to leave. So the humans thought that they were gods, and because they could come and go from the earth in the sky, that was proof that they were gods. And these other groups wanted control of the galaxy. This was the issue going on. And these ET hybrids that were left behind weren't as spiritually advanced as the original ETs. The winners of this battle were not the ETs here. They lost, and they were forced to leave the planet. The winners were now watching us and protecting us and not doing any more interference. The hybrids are now an experiment. They're allowing people, or at this time, they're allowing people to develop, because some of the hybrids in this woman's time still retain some of those advanced abilities. So just to be clear, the ETs hybridized humans, manipulating their DNA, but they also made babies with these hybridized humans, and so they had more ET blood, and they had special skills and special abilities. ETs left them in charge, but eventually that got watered down, and that was the problem. They lost abilities. They had a machine that focused energy to help build. They used partly mental power as well as physical power. Some of it was telepathic. No one who was left behind, who after they left for the war, knew how to get the thing working, so it became useless. Cannon thought that this sounded like earlier sessions from the Essenes and the Keepers, her books, and it absolutely does. As the bloodline was diluted, the abilities weakened, and so it dilutes, but more people have it. And so what you end up with is a population today of a lot of people who have latent abilities they're not even aware they have, and they can be developed. So the victors turned some of it off because on purpose in other people, because it was too dangerous in the wrong hands. But these are slowly being returned to some of us. If we end up misusing these abilities, they'll be gone again. So, you develop your psychic abilities and you do a circus act, and you're getting people to act like chickens and stuff. That's not good. That's not the whole idea. The idea is not to use it to manipulate or control people or for your own benefit. It's to help people and to advantage our awareness, our awakening. The winners were from a dark dimension and a time-space continuum. The bad ones were forced to leave. There was a peace treaty. So in summary, aliens came here to begin life processes, and then they left us because there's a policy of non-interference. Like I said earlier, you cannot interfere with free will. Others came and they enslaved us. They hybridized the primitive humans to use them as an enslaved worker population. The Galactic Council banished the bad aliens. They had that disagreement, right? And they banished them. But they allowed the experiment to continue. What experiment? The human presence experiment. How were we going to turn out? Our psychic powers got diluted to near non-existence, though we know that's not completely true. And those abilities are dormant in our DNA. Everything possible is in our DNA. And they're now being reactivated. We have a lot of DNA that sits around not working. It's not junk. It's just deactivated. They're now reactivating it in some people. So this person in the session has a little of it left, and they make her go to courts for judgments. And this woman looking out at the cove, in the past, she has a few abilities left. She can tell the difference between truth and lies. And they make her go into judgments and say, well, I know that he's telling the truth, or I know she's telling a lie. And she doesn't like it. She feels it's interfering with her free will. So it's a curse because she sees people lying all the time, scheming, fighting for power. It's gross to be around. So she flees to be alone in a room, and the room is actually literally shielded from vibrations. She has a sister who's a healer. Her husband is away, but he wants a son. She knows this. She's picked up on his thoughts. She has 2 young children, so they must be girls, I don't know. She can place her hands on a device in the temple, visualize light, and can get telepathic communication. So she still retains a lot of power. She can see the answers in her mind. She doesn't really like to be around people. We can all relate to that. She fears that they're turning her daughters against her. Palace intrigue. And they threaten her with exposure to these bad vibrations by putting her in a village or a dungeon and leaving her, to the environment. They're using her to get information from other people. So Cannon sees that this person is distressed and moves her in session to a future day. So she's decided to jump off the balcony so they can't continue to harass her. And she does that and describes making the leap, but then looking at her body, at the rocks. She has this out-of-body experience that she describes in detail. She said she couldn't allow them to use her anymore. Her soul went on to a state of peace and quiet. And Cannon is told that Rachel, the woman who's in trance, has a fear of opening up psychically because of how her psychic abilities were used against her in a former life. She can sense other people's emotions. She fears fear holds people back in their jobs and relationships, and it delays us taking actions we should take. It is the root of all negative emotion. Cannon is told that anything physical or wrong on the right side is from your present life, and anything wrong on the left side of your body is from your past life. So the extremities, if they're having problems, it comes from a past fear of moving forward. It's an interesting way to look at it. Chapter 3, don't repeat the same mistakes. This is a client, Sheila, who's at a crossroads. She's a teacher and has no true sense of purpose. She wants to know, should she move or change paths or do what? So in her trance, she saw the big city near the water, surrounded by a wall like a gigantic fortress with many people in it. There are tower buildings of various heights with small, narrow windows, and there are soldiers. She says it's very old. It's kind of like, something Sumerian. And they're in a place where there's very hot weather. She's a female. She's blonde. She is wearing a long brown robe. Her left arm has bracelets and etchings, bracelets with etchings. Very rare. It's not gold. It's something else. And her left arm is important because of this. It creates an energy flow through her left hand. The metal is a conductor, and it magnifies energy on the outside. So it's a receptor of energy that is magnified by this bracelet. She channels it and can give it form and uses the energy to communicate, but not always with words. She uses the symbols as a universal language to anywhere. This is alchemy, and it changes form, and it takes voices of light beings and goes through her with information to others. And the symbols are interpreted by each particular individual, no matter where they're from or who they are. They'll receive it in a way they can understand it. She can draw in energy and retain or record it for later or send it out. She can put it in form, like in a metal or stone tablet. And it's pure information. It's protected from misuse. She says, I am a priestess. I can record information, paint symbols on the walls, and paint it on white pillars, and not everybody can read them. Only people who are ready for the information will actually see the symbols on the walls. She says, I'm just a messenger. I can speak languages without having to learn them. Now that's a superpower I'd like to have. Messages are not to be hidden from the people, she says. She lives in the temple with many others who heal bodies. And they use sound often. They also heal people's minds. She hates that some use their power to kill people, which they do. She hates to give them information that they misuse against others. Some just want to destroy things. They want to accumulate and hoard. They create weapons and they misuse the power of creation in doing that. For example, there's a crystal sword that cuts anything. It's made of energy. And it should not be used to kill people. The temple uses stars, weather, light, all of it as messengers. Stars warn of change, opportunity, surges of energy. They are an oracle. They're, astrology. she's moved ahead, and to the day that her baby died, something went wrong at the birth. Moved ahead again because she's so distressed. She now has 4 children, and each has own gifts. She says there are fewer negative people because they started using the energy to protect themselves and keep the negative ones out. The good people did. They use the energy like a moat, and they create a mirage to keep out the bad. And it repels the dark ones. She says, we feel safer now. On the day of her death, she says, you choose that day. And she had a farewell party. So you just dissolve your bonds, she says, and you have guardians that help. It's just like being born, only backwards. Your body dissolves, and she says, why are people so barbaric? They're just not ready. They just are not at that part in their journey. Chapter 4, bringing back ancient healing. We have Trina, a retired RN, and Cannon observes that most people come to her and ask, I need to know my purpose, my path in life. And in this trance, Trina is in a sacred forest, and the setting is near a healing beach with water. And she says, we all use magic and use it to stay alive. She's a young woman in a village of huts. She gets food and healing and jewelry from the water in the woods. She gets guidance from her heart. She says, all you have to do is listen and be connected to the earth. So all people of the village meditate and heal. They share their knowledge, and it's better than having one person controlling our people to get stronger. You know, that doesn't work. She's moved forward to a day where there's a new baby that's brought to her for a blessing. And she later trained this baby as it grew to be her replacement. And on her last day, she chooses to go. After death, she asks entities to see where she came from. She came from originally a place of peace and love. She had no form. She wasn't in the physical. And she's shown pulsing white light, a form going in and out. So it's pulsating in and out like a collective organism. The entities are keepers of knowledge, and anything learned is not lost. It's stored in the subconscious. That's a short chapter. Now we're on chapter 5, hiding the information. Joanne, a real estate agent, wanted to do music and healing. And in session, in her past life, she discovered that she had lived with ignorant, superstitious people. She had psychic abilities, and she was viewed with great suspicion. Many old healers were persecuted, executed, and that's part of their soul growth. It causes people unconscious fear when they're developing psychic abilities and when they see it in others. Joanne was different. She was a collector. She created bodies that looked human to fit in, but they came from other galaxies, and they were there purely to collect information and take it back. They're often viewed with fear and suspicion because of their abilities. In a trance, she's in the 1700s in a small town. She's a teenage girl with long hair, a gray dress, and shackled ankles. The townspeople are called to the center by a bell ringing. Priest is ringing. He reads off a scroll about people who sin against the church, and she is being punished for saying that we are each a god. Originally, from the village far away is where she came, which was isolated, and everyone in this isolated village studied science, but they hide the truth about what they do. They use their minds to see beyond the stars. They don't read words. They use symbols, and they draw what they see. They came in from a beam of light. The information comes in from a beam of light from the third eye of the teacher. The information is about planets and a station that they track, and they hide all of this information, send what they learn back to it. They were planted here to do this, and they assumed human form to blend in. They're really light beings. The information also deals with the life force and energy that she's told that they do this 24/7. They don't need to eat or sleep. They're constantly collecting information. And it's stored in upside down pyramids going into the earth and stored inside these pyramids. The station in the sky comes to the pyramid for information. Comes in, and it comes in a craft, and the average person can't even see it because they're not ready. She was curious about people who went to the town. People thought that she was strange and talked about, people in the town thought she was strange and talked about truth that made no sense to them. And also she had kind of a glow about her, and she didn't eat much, and this scared them. So they burned her. And she said, I left my body before it burned. I stood with the priest and watched, and I told him I was sorry for him. And because she told him that, he felt a little sorry, you know. So she shot back to her own galaxy as a beam of light. She rested and then went on to other missions to learn and help. So she needed to remember this in this lifetime as Joanne, that she carried information, and she still has it encoded in her DNA. She just needs to write it. She's still receiving information since she was born as Joanne. People didn't believe her. She talked about UFOs and ETs and energy and light and people in this lifetime. And they just ridiculed her and made her stop talking. Village people in this past life were all burned by the people of the town when they found out that they'd been studying science and keeping it secret. And they burned the information. Ignorance perpetuates itself. So we're going to end here because we're at the beginning of a new chapter. And I hope that this is capturing your imagination and definitely continues the work that she's done before. So this is the end of video number 1, and I'll be back with video number 2. And thank you very much for watching and listening to this book with me.